Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Gundabad Playthrough Podcast, and I'll be continuing my Firered Normielock challenge. So what is a Nuzlocke? Essentially, a Nuzlocke is just a fan-made set of self-imposed rules to make the game even more challenging for veteran players. And there's only 3 important rules to a Nuzlocke. Rule number 1, always name your Pokemon. And rule number 2, whenever you enter a new zone, you must always attempt to capture the first Pokemon you run into, while only having 1 attempt. And rule number 3, if your Pokemon just so happen to faint to battle or poison or fire effects, those Pokemon then become unusable for the rest of the game. However, one thing that's good about a Nuzlocke is at the end of the day, I get to create and set the rules for myself. So now let me show you the full list of the rules I plan on using for this challenge. Pause the video if you need to. So, a while ago, either for Christmas or for my birthday, my brother bought me a couple of copies of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Starter deck. And even though it was cool, unfortunately, I was super duper into Magic. This was way before I decided to dive into Yu-Gi-Oh! And because the starter decks that he gave me was to an archetype that I really didn't have any interest of making a real deck out of at the moment, I unfortunately threw those cards away, not realizing that I was going to need it much later when I did decide to kind of come back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Hindsight, right? And no, I'm not going to tell you which starter deck, because the last thing I need is for y'all to judge me way more than you're probably going to be doing it right now, typing in the fucking comments. I deal with a lot of bullshit already, and the last thing I need to do is deal with yours. That being said, I eventually heard through the grapevine that Yu-Gi-Oh! Had a game mode very similar to Magic. Apparently it had its own commander format, and at first I thought that was cool. The game mode was called Deck Masters, and as someone who was majority of his time when it came to card games was playing Magic's commander, this had my interest. In which I came to find out that about 95% of the community doesn't play at all, because if you know anything about alternative Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats, it's just easier to ghost their existence. And yes, I have heard of Domain, and even though Domain has problems, the truth is that I'm actually very surprised as to why it isn't more popular until I hear kind of what people's problems with it is, and then it's like, okay, I understand it. And don't worry, I'm going to be getting into that in just a little bit, just you wait. And after watching Stevie's videos on the subject matter of alternative formats, I'll say that he was about 100% spot on to the subject matter, except for this one part until he decided to explain himself. Because the part of his video that I definitely disagreed with at first was the investment problem, and then I let him continue talking. Because for me it's like, this is Yu-Gi-Oh! You're trying to tell me that a lot of people aren't already invested into this shit? But what I do agree with him on is the fact that people don't want to invest in these alternative formats because you're essentially investing into a dead product, even though it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Because even if the money part of the investment isn't necessarily an issue, you still have the 2 other investment problems, which is community and time. And the truth is, as a Commander player, I kind of wanted to understand as to why Commander is so loved and Deckmaster is kind of just thrown to the side. And even though in Stevie's video he essentially tells you, now it's my turn to do it. But first I'm going to tell you something that kind of made me laugh. I remember I was reacting to this YouTuber by the name of Yu-Gi-Oh! Commander, and he was reacting to Team APS, talking about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are searching for the casual game format, and this dude was getting frustrated being like, play Domain, damn it. And even though on paper there's really nothing wrong with these alternative Yu-Gi-Oh! Format, what I start to believe, you see, is that these game modes with different rules also have different requirements forcing you to play a specific way that's far different from modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And if that was a little bit too difficult for you to understand, let me break it down for you. Because none of these alternative game modes truly share the core fundamental game design of what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, especially in the modern sense, and it makes it so that it feels like you're playing a completely different game underneath the Yu-Gi-Oh! Brand. And guess what? A lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players know this, which is one of the reasons why they don't even bother. Now, I'm not trying to imply that people won't ever try out these alternative formats. I feel like curiosity is already strong enough for that. They will take a dive. However, after a couple of attempts, they're just going to be like, this is useless. And then just go back to, well, where the community is. And this is the reason why Magic's Commander is just so successful, because even though there are restrictions with the rules that it has, fundamentally, you are not changing the core design of the way how the game is played. And don't get me wrong, I understand that there might be a little bit of a hardcore Domain fans potentially reacting or commenting to this video being like, hey, we're doing just fine over here. I don't really know what's wrong with Domain, because in all honesty, I think Domain is that perfect thing of what people are talking about, of like, hey, we want that casual format that resembles the anime, and I think Domain does that in spades. But one of the reasons why I feel like people may not want to do that is because the restrictions, for me personally, this is much more of a personal opinion, I feel like the restrictions of Domain don't really suit Yu-Gi-Oh! All that well, especially the way how it currently plays. And that's the only reason why I feel like a lot of people would still say, fuck off Domain. The truth is that there's really only one rule that I have on Domain that's a little bit iffy, because I get it, it's supposed to be this one-to-one recreation of Commander. Well, the truth is that it's actually kind of like two rules, but they go hand in hand. One of them is that every card is limited, and I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is much funner when you can have 3 ofs. However, the other rule that kind of goes in tandem with this one is that every card is usable, meaning that currently there is no banned cards. So it's kind of nice that even this quote-unquote strong banned cards are like actually kind of weakened by only being limited at 1. That being said, at the end of the day, I feel like the rules to Domain is very, very clever. So, now that we understand the problems of Deckmaster, how do we go about to fix it? And look, I may not be able to fix it, however I'm going to give it my best shot or die trying, and since we've already dissected the problems of Yu-Gi-Oh's Deckmasters, it's time for us to look at its counterpart and what makes it so successful, meaning it's time for us to look at the rules for Commander. Rule number 1, your Commander is a legendary creature. Rule number 2, your deck must have 100 cards total, which includes your Commander. Rule number 3, you must use 1 copy of each spell, monster, artifact, enchantments, or special land cards, with the exception being normal land cards. Rule number 4, you start the game with 40 HP. 5A, start the game off with 7 cards in the hand. 5B, you can't have more than 7 cards in the hand, unless a card you control says otherwise. Rule number 6, the player going first may draw a card only if there is more than 2 players in your game. Rule number 7, can go up to 8 players. Rule number 8, commander damage. If a player has been dealt 21 or more combat damage by the same commander over the course of a game, they lose. And I can't believe I almost forgot this rule. Rule number 9, command tax. Every time your commander gets put back into the command zone, there's a cumulative cost of 2 mana to recast your commander. So, how do we translate these rules for Yu-Gi-Oh? Let's start with number 1, legendary creature. So in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's not really a thing known as a legendary creature, however the closest thing to that description outside of its flavor text are boss monsters. So why not use boss monsters? But first we kinda need to decide what a boss monster is. So for me, what defines a boss monster in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a monster that requires resources to even get summoned to the field. Now I understand that in the anime it was like level 5 and 6s counted as that. I don't think modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Players ever consider 5 and 6s to be boss monsters anymore, which means level 7s and higher. But also in Magic, legendary creatures also tend to have a different colored border, usually gold to show that it's special, and the only alternative color in Yu-Gi-Oh! Apart from the main deck is blue, as in ritual monsters. So boom. Simple, logical, easy. Next, rule number 2. Rule number 2 is one that we can just glance at, which is the 100 cards total. So easy. You must have 60 cards for your main deck, including your deck master. However, let's increase the extra deck by 20, but the minimum is still 15. So it means you can have a total of 75 cards or 80. Rule number 3, the 1 of rule. And kind of like I said before, even though I like this rule for Commander, I don't know if it actually belongs in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now again, that's just my opinion, however, I want to make it very easy for Yu-Gi-Oh! Players to transition between modern and my version. So, to keep things simple, we are using TCG rules. Rule number 4, increased HP. Now in Magic, your health is essentially doubled, and the truth is that even though I would like to double the HP of Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like that would actually be too much for a 1v1, however I'm still willing to raise it, but only by 4,000 life points. So your starting HP could be 12, and for every other opponent you play against, maybe you get to raise it by 2,000 more. Rule number 5, starting hand size and hand size limit. So easy, your starting hand and your maximum hand size is going to be increased to 6. Because 6 is the maximum amount of cards you can have in your hand in Yu-Gi-Oh! You see, when learning Yu-Gi-Oh! After playing Magic, I thought that you couldn't have any more than your starting hand, which was 5. As it turns out, this was completely wrong and pissed me off. Because in my mind, I'm like, why the hell don't you just start with 6? And the only niggas that know how to answer that question is the fucking creator of the goddamn game. Rule number 6, first turn draw. In Magic, this depends on whether or not you have more than 2 players. Otherwise, if it's just a 1v1, then nothing changes. And the truth is, I don't think this rule needs to be changed or translated. This works just fine. Rule number 7, player limit. As you can tell with the last few rules, I'm 100% making it in mind that you can go against more than one opponent. However, even though the more the merrier, I believe that in this type of format, I don't think it could go any more than 4 players without it getting hectic. So that's going to be your limit. Rule number 8, commander damage. This is just an alternative form of winning, which is allowing your commander to do a specific amount of damage. However, in Yu-Gi-Oh, that's not really going to work, because even though you might have a lot of life points, the problem for Yu-Gi-Oh is that I think you're going to be attacking with multiple monsters, draining your opponent's life points rather quickly, so therefore, I impose we do something kind of similar. I still want you to have this alternative form of winning. However, I would much rather your commander to kill your opponent by attacking him 3 times directly. Rule number 9, commander tax. In Yu-Gi-Oh, there is no mana. However, after reading the rules for domain, they do have a solution that I am going to steal for my variation. However, the only resource that you're actually capable of giving is your life points. So I like the 500 life points that increases every time you summon your boss monster. So when all is said and done, this is what the rules will look like. Now I do have optional rules, however this is going to be something that I would much rather play with later instead of right now, because I want to go testing. Now what am I going to call this game mode? I plan on calling it Overseer. Now I think some of you guys are looking at rule number 1 and noticed that I might have changed a couple of things, and one of the reasons why is because unfortunately for Yu-Gi-Oh, there's not a lot of ritual archetypes, and as we all know, the newer ritual archetypes are just way stronger than the old ones. And also changing the rules slightly so that you may use level 7 or higher monsters makes it so that you kind of somewhat avoid the investment problem. However, the community and time problem, I'm just going to leave that to you. If it's something that you want to try out, go ahead. However, do not comment that, oh, I tried it and it was cool. Make a video and link that video in your comment. And genuinely let me know what you think. Now, because this is my game mode, this is also my rules. Now, I will officially become Overseer Rule Committee Ambassador. Now, my first decree as Mr. Orca is for Pot Greed to become unlimited, cause this is meant to be a fun game mode, god damn it. And with that said, I hope you enjoy the video. Otherwise,
go fuck yourself.